Her sister is definitely much more crazier than her. And my favourite part of this novel was the parts with Eddie from Tesco. And I really like it when novels have kind of like random sentences such as, I dislike watching myself and dogs and noise. So hello, my name is Rhianna, and recently I've read a few books with protagonists that could be described as a little bit unhinged, and so I thought I would talk about them in a video. So I really enjoy reading books with protagonists that don't really care about being liked and are also perhaps a bit unhinged, because I think in my day-to-day life I really want to be liked like most people, and so I find it quite cathartic reading books with characters that really don't care about that. And so to start off the video we have Circe by Madeline Miller. Madeline Miller is known for writing retellings of Greek myths. One of her most famous books is Song of Achilles, which I really enjoyed, and I wrote a music theme based on that book because I liked it so much. And Circe I equally enjoyed, although I would say that Circe is not really unhinged. I expected her to be, which is why I'm including her in this video, because I didn't know much about Circe, but I was under the impression that she was maybe a bit like a crazy woman living on an island, but she's actually not crazy. She's actually the most sane character in this book, I would say. Her sister is definitely much more crazier than her. And what I really like about this story is it's a really accessible look into the Greek myth of Circe, and it's accessible because Circe is really presented as a human-like character. Her thoughts, her feelings, her conflicts, all very human-like. There's not really a specific plot to this story. It's not like, what will Circe do when this happens? It's more like, what will Circe do when this and this and this and this and this happens, because it's more of a character study on who she is as a person. And I really like character studies and getting to know a character so well. And there are quite a few dilemmas that Circe faces, one of which is near the beginning of the book where she falls in love with a mortal and is forbidden to be with a mortal if you are a god. And so what she does, because she has like these kind of magical powers, she turns the mortal that she fell in love with into a god, hoping that he would love her back. But then he has this immense power of being a god, and he doesn't want to love her back because now he's a god and he can have like any god or nymph that he wants because he's all powerful now. And that's a big learning curve for her, because she realised that she used her power like hoping to gain something that she then did not manage to gain. And in the story, Circe is eventually exiled to an island, and on this island she becomes renowned for turning seamen that turn up onto her island into pigs and I think other animals. But there is a clear reason as to why she does this, and she doesn't do this to like all the seamen. Actually, she only does it to the ones that are less than favourable, I would say. And I wouldn't say I know a lot about Greek myths. I would say that I know as much as the Percy Jackson books allow me to, and I think you don't need to know a lot going into this book, and it's a great like way to learn more about the Greek myths, because there's not just Circe, but there's lots of other Greek gods and goddesses that are mentioned and that are involved in the story. Like Icarus plays a tiny part in the story, and I really like that, how you kind of see other stories intertwined within Circe's. The next book I want to talk about is Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is my third Ottessa Moshfegh book. I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation and also Lapvona. I would say My Year of Rest and Relaxation can very much be included on a list of unhinged females in books. And I would say Eileen can too. And Eileen is about Eileen. She works in a male prison in the 1960s, and this quite glamorous woman turns up to work at the prison. Her name is Rebecca, and Eileen becomes quite interested in her, and then the story sort of progresses from there. I think part of the joy of the story is kind of watching the story unfurl and not knowing much before going in. And I also watched the movie of this book, and I would say that I don't think the book really translated that well into film. I think that's because Ottessa Moshfegh's characters usually have a lot of internal conflicts going on, and I don't think they really translate visually that well because it's happening internally. The movie did quite a good job of showing how unconventional Eileen is in a visual way, but I just was left after the movie kind of not really feeling that rewarded, because it just didn't quite work in the same way as the book does. And even though in the book and in the film there's quite a dramatic end. I felt like in the movie we hadn't built up enough to that ending, but in the book I felt like we had. Perhaps because the movie was only like an hour and a half, so it didn't feel like I'd really got connected enough to Eileen or Rebecca as characters to really feel the tense moment at the end of the story, whereas in the book I really felt that. And next we have perhaps the most unhinged female character on this list, and she is in the book Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. And this book is about a girl who we see during her university time and also up into her late 20s, I believe, and she is a photographer and she photographs men in quite like sexual vulnerable positions, and she is quite revered because of this photography, but the process of getting these pictures is kind of a bit disturbing because she has to scout the models, and she doesn't really scout models all the time, she scouts like normal people and she brings them back to her flat. And because her photography is quite out there, it means that she has quite interesting encounters with these men that she brings back to her flat. And I saw on Goodreads that this novel was compared to like American Psycho but for hot girls and I can kind of see where they're coming from because the character is a little bit psychotic and also the writing is really quite bold in that it's not trying to be poetic, I suppose. It's like it doesn't care, which is quite refreshing actually. Like it's the writing has lots of swear words in it, and it's not afraid to be controversial. And my favourite part of this novel was the parts with Eddie from Tesco because the protagonist is really quite cold and calculated and a bit psychotic, and she doesn't really feel like things a lot of the time because I think she's quite numb to things. But with this character, Eddie from Tesco, she actually starts to like him and she can't really understand why. And I quite like tropes in books where you have kind of a hard character but like one person kind of brings out their more sensitive, softer side, and so I really like those parts in the book. I would say that this book is very adult. If you are maybe under 18, this is probably not appropriate for you, but I think if you want to read about a character that is just really out there living life, not really caring about what people think, then this might be one for you. Next, I wanted to quickly mention a TV show that I recently watched because I think this TV show would make a great book, and I think the writing was just amazing in it. And it's a BBC production but also in partnership with Amazon Prime. I watched it on Amazon Prime and it's called Chloe. It's about a woman who is called Becky, and her best friend growing up was called Chloe, and for some reason they drifted apart, but Becky is still like kind of interested in Chloe's life. She follows her kind of a lot on social media. Then one day Chloe dies, and before Chloe dies, Chloe commits suicide, and before that happens Chloe rings Becky, and Becky is sleeping at the time so she doesn't answer it. So Becky is like really confused as to why Chloe, who she hasn't spoke to in many years, rang her just before she killed herself. And so Becky wants to find out why, and she's a little bit unhinged as the topic of this video might suggest. And to find out more about how Chloe and why Chloe died, Becky starts to kind of infiltrate Chloe's life by pretending to be someone else called Sasha. So she pretends that she's like lived in Tokyo as an art marketing person or something, and she kind of cultivates this fake life so that she can more easily infiltrate Chloe's friendship group, who are quite like affluent and yeah. And what I loved about that setup is that the story is always quite stressful and tense because Becky is always like one step away from being found out that she's not actually who she says she is. And I love that in books, and I think it was really one of the best TV shows that I've watched recently. I would love for it to have been a novel because I love reading books, and I think this would have made a great book because I love it when tension is done in novels because it keeps me on the edge of my seat. So I think if you have Amazon Prime, BBC, this is one to definitely watch. Then finally, I want to talk about We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is quite a famous writer of horror and thriller stories from the 20th century. Her perhaps most famous novel is The Haunting of Hill House, which is also a Netflix TV series. I haven't read that book, but I've watched the Netflix TV series and I really enjoyed it. And this is my first Shirley Jackson novel and I really enjoyed it. I think it's not really that horror or that thriller. If you're looking for something that's gonna scare you, keep you on the edge of your seat, this is maybe not it. It's a bit more meditative, a bit more like literary fiction, I would say, because it follows a girl named Mary Cat. She lives in this big house in this town. She lives with a woman called Constance, who is a sister, and also with her uncle. And they have a few other family members who died because they were poisoned. And it's a bit of a mystery throughout the novel as to why they died and how and why they were poisoned. And I think Mary Cat is the standout of this book. There's the part where she introduces herself, which I will just read now because I think it kind of sets up the story quite well. So it says, "My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I'm 18 years old and I live with my sister Constance. I have often thought that with any luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf because the two middle fingers on both my hand are the same length, but I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike watching myself and dogs and noise. I like my sister Constance and Richard Planet Gednant and Amanita Phalides, the death cup mushrooms. Everyone else in our family is dead." And I really like it when novels have kind of like random sentences such as, "I dislike watching myself and dogs and noise." I like kind of the quirky offbeatness of that. And while I was reading this, it really reminded me of like a Tim Burton story. I could imagine the house looking kind of like eccentric and dark. And I think the creepy atmosphere that this novel creates is really well done. And another great book if you're looking to read about quite an unhinged female protagonist. So those are the books, the stories that I wanted to talk about. I really love reading these kind of books, so if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know, and I will see you in another video soon. Bye-bye.